name's Judith Stein, and I'm the Canadian legend of burlesque, living in Nelson, British Columbia. The beginning, so long ago. In 1973, I was going to the University of Oregon, and I'd taken a year off and went to live in England, and came back, no money, but I wanted to continue my schooling, so looking for a job. Well, in a university town, there weren't that many jobs, and someone said, well, there's topless gogo girls, they're hiring them. And I was a radical feminist. It just wasn't, it was like, ooh. But I could work at night and I could go to school during the day. So I went down and applied, and I got hired. And the first thing we had to do was you danced to one song, and then the second song you took your top off. And I took my top off, and it was like, yeah, okay, this is okay. And from then on, so I worked as a topless go-go girl, and in between we cocktail waitressed, and but I got really good at dancing, but not very good at cocktail waitressing. So they sent me upstairs to work with the strippers, and we would work in between the strippers. And I started watching them, and it was like, that's in the day when there were like really big shows and costuming and professional strippers. And they encouraged me. They said, you should why don't you become a stripper? You can make like $300 a week. And they'll fly you to Japan and to Guam and to Iceland. And it was like, okay. So I decided what I was going to do, start thinking about some sort of acts that I could possibly get together, and went to Kootenay, Alaska as a go-go girl, and to make money to be able to go and get my costumes. All our costumes were custom made then. So I ended up spending 6 months in Alaska. I think it was 6 weeks in Kodiak, and I went to Anchorage, and I worked there and made my money, and went to San Francisco and got, I think, 2 professional costumes made, and was, and put together some that I had made, and because I am a seamstress, and they put me in an old burlesque theater, and the days of burlesque were over. These theaters where they had maybe a lineup of 4 strippers, and we danced in between the dirty movies. But it was a good place. This is where a lot of the older strippers who didn't want to be on the road were working. They had years of experience. They had been headliners, and they would put us newbies in with them. So we learned, and we learned our lessons mostly in the dressing room. It was like what lipstick to wear, how to work that panel, do this, don't do that, I remember getting my first contract and going, oh my God, and having an older stripper explain the whole contract. They set us up with agents, and at that time we worked with agents. And so, and what an agent would do would book you into a certain venue or a certain club that it was suitable. And so off I went, and a couple downfalls, I think just kept upgrading my game and learning my art, and away I went. And I traveled for 17 years internationally, everywhere from New Zealand to Guam to Hawaii, all over the United States, all over Canada. And it was quite the adventure. How did my family react? I didn't tell them for 2 years. The first time I was in Alaska, or second time I guess, it was over the Christmas holidays, and of course one has to call your parents at Christmas time who lived back in Ontario. And so my mother said, so where are you? And I said, I'm in Alaska. And she said, what are you doing there? And I said, oh, well, I'm a go-go girl. And she said, oh, isn't that nice? Do you wear little white boots? And yeah. My father came on the phone and he said, what are you doing in Alaska? And I said, I'm a dancer. And I got a big harumph. So Dad was on the game. Yeah, he kind of figured it out. And he said, well, just stay safe. So about 2 years later, I came back. I was on my way to Boston, and Toronto was on the way. It was around Christmas time. So I said to my parents, I'm coming home for Christmas. They said, okay. And I thought, okay, oh my God, what are they going to expect? So I went out and bought this perfect little suit, and the perfect little hat, bag, shoes, and gloves that matched. And I got off the plane, and my mother went, oh, thank goodness, we thought you were going to look like Dolly Parton. And so that was cool. So then it came up to, what are we going to tell the neighbors? And so there was one night, and my parents were having their friends who I had grown up with in for Christmas cocktails, right? And so everyone's chit-chatting, and finally someone said, so Judith, what are you doing now? And I had already said to my parents, well, tell them I'm a stewardess. That's why I get to travel a lot. And my mother pipes up, she's a stripper, right? And everyone went, and my mom said to all the women, come and see your costumes. And all the husbands were sort of like, yeah, and so anyway, we got through that, and it was like, and my parents would come to my shows sometimes, and the first show they came to, I was having a conniption, and but we made it through, and my mom thought, they both said, okay, you seem to know what you're doing, and it was a good show, and so that following Friday, the club owner called me up and he said, your father just called and he's bringing 15 people in. And I said, who are the 15 people? He goes, apparently it's your family. So it was my aunts and my uncles and my cousins, and quite frankly, it was hilarious. They were really supportive. They were like funny. I come from a funny family, and it was just like, okay, so I was out, so that's how it went, and when I knew that, my dad said, you know what you're getting yourself into, and I said, yeah, and he said, okay, and he handed me a dime and said, call me if you ever need me. Go-go dancing was usually, you just stood on a little box or on a little stage, and back in my day you did the boogaloo or the shrug. Some places you took your top off, some places you didn't. Burlesque was the old-fashioned form of stripping. Burlesque back in its day, in the days of Gypsy Rose, in I would say the 30s and the 40s, was the outcome of vaudeville. And vaudeville, this is before TV or Netflix or anything like that. So vaudeville was a stage show. It was comedians, it was dogs jumping through hoops, it was magicians, aerial, and but they were starting to lose their crowd also. So of course, one thing that will certainly bolster up any show is some half-naked women. And so they started incorporating strippers. And as in the 50s, and the advent of TV and things like the Ed Sullivan Show, started booking people, and people who came out of vaudeville would be the Marx Brothers, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, all the Bob Hope, Jack Benny, right? So they moved on to TV, and as well as a lot of the aerials and variety acts. What was left was striptease. And so it ended up that, basically a strip show was a strip show. It would be maybe 3 to 4, maybe 5, 6 strippers all in a row, and if you were lucky you had an MC. A lot of places didn't. And so that was the difference. And stripping started out where you wore pasties and a G-string or sometimes full panties. It evolved where the pasties came off and pretty soon it was topless and bottomless, which is now what's happening in the strip industry. And I will note that I do support my working strippers. So the new burlesque, okay, it started, there's a little bit of history behind that. There was a famous stripper named Dixie Evans and another stripper named Jenny Lee, and they got older, and as many of us, didn't save their money. And so they bought a farm out in the middle of the desert in Helendale, California, and started a little burlesque museum. And they called it the Burlesque Hall of Fame. From there, it grew into a festival. And the first couple of years, I believe, people just sort of heard about it word of mouth. And from there, people started getting interested. And most of the people that attended were strippers, working strippers, right? And so it grew, and it started getting more popularity, and it was moved to Las Vegas, where it was kind of like Topsy. It grew, and now there's probably 2,000-3,000 people attend a weekend in Las Vegas at the Orleans Hotel, and people come from all over the world, and it's 4 nights of burlesque. There are some that seem to think that they call it art, where strippers call it a job. Okay. There is more of a storyline in burlesque. There is more athleticism and more of a provocative content in stripping. The difference between burlesque and stripping now is burlesque, you spend money to get into a show. Stripping, you get paid to do a show. I'm getting ready to go to Texas and to Whitehorse, and yeah, it seems like I go somewhere, a number of places every year. I was invited to Finland, Helsinki, Finland, and to New Zealand, and they fly me to New Zealand, and I do a show, and they pay me, and it's a hell of a good hobby in retirement. When I first started stripping, it was like I was like 5'2" and 90 pounds, soaking wet, and thought I was a little too chubby, right? But I also, I guess about owning it was that I knew I had the capacity to connect with people, to make them smile, perhaps make them think, to entertain. I was an entertainer. That's how I came across. I never felt like I was like totally sexy or anything like that. It was just, I was up there to have people, I was up there to instigate some laughter and some enjoyment, and about having fun, you know. And if I'm owning my own body, then I'm making people comfortable. That, you know, that was one of the things about that I liked about burlesque and stripping was it allowed people to look at another person's body without shame. Yeah, and we all know that it's not politically correct to look at someone's body or stare at somebody's body. Well, yeah, I get that. But this is a place where they're encouraged to look. We want them to look. We want to shake our boobs or our bums at them. We encourage that, and just so they see how absurd it all is. That's what burlesque is also. It's the absurdity. Nice girls didn't strip. I remember when I moved to Nelson, there were certainly some raised eyebrows because I outed myself. I was like, yeah, I was a stripper. And some people were like a little aghast that I should tell people that I did that. And I think they, I think, there were a number of times that I peeled unwanted masculine hands off my rear end. That old sneaky grab thing. That's all right, I have a really good grip and I know how to break fingers. I knew some women felt threatened by me because I was sexually out, or presumed sexually out. I got flack from, at that time, some of the, and I hate to say this because I am a feminist, some of the feminist community. How could I call myself a feminist and take my clothes off? And it was like, you told me I was to be owning my own pussy, so I am. And it's a way for me to learn and to give my way around the world. I know who I am. I know that I have a strong moral fiber and a sense of right and a sense of wrong, and I live my life accordingly, no matter what I'm doing. All those years of being on the road and being independent, and I'm pretty outspoken, and I like things the way I like them, and I'm not very good at compromising. And and I like living alone. I like coming and going when I can, and I've had a couple. I've had one live-in relationship, and that was okay. But no, I'm not interested in. I have men friends. Some have been lovers, but I quite prefer the fact that they have their own place and their own life, and let's get together when we want to get together, I was working in Florida, in Miami, and I needed some photographs done, and because we used to get booked through 8x10 glossy photos. And so somebody recommended this photographer, and that was great. We did a shoot, and they came out, and he said, I'll be back in a week with the prints. And I said, okay, great. He came back a week later, and I like the prints. That one there, and he said, I have someone who requested one of your photos, and I said, well, you weren't supposed to show them to anybody. He said, well, they kind of fell out. I said, yeah, right. And I said, well, I said, tell him I'll sell one for $20. And he said, I said, who is it? And he said, Muhammad Ali. And I went, tell him I will trade him one. So Muhammad Ali had a 8x10 signed glossy photo of me, and I had one of him signed back. So that, when you became a professional stripper, and you wanted good money, then it was about having good costumes, and that meant that they were elaborate, there were layers upon layers, they were super unique, they were embellished, it was feathers, it was everything. When I first started, I made a number of my own just little costumes, but then as I got better, I started getting professional costumes. And the costumers at that time were generally women who had been strippers. So they knew exactly what we needed. We needed the separating zippers. You know, we needed things that popped off when we wanted them to pop off. We wanted something that was unique, right? We also paid for them. You know, they were not cheap, but they were glorious, and I still have an old part of my cowboy costume I just dug out. That costume I wore for 15 years, and it's looking pretty ragged, but it's still together. And when you think about, like, back in those days, we were doing 4 to 5 shows, 20-minute shows a day, right? That costume would be worn once or twice a day, 6 days a week, for 15 years. So these were built, you know, these costumes were made to last. So yeah, I moved here and I was living with the family, and the kids were adolescents, young adolescents, and their dad said, why don't you get a, you know, and I said, I can't, you know, I'm looking for jobs. And I made his daughter a nightgown. And someone else said, wow, that's really beautiful. My wife would like something like that. And I went, uh-huh. So I made like 5 nightgowns, and they all sold. And so the next year I did the Kootenay Craft Fair back at the arena, and I think I had 20 nightgowns, and I sold out. And I went, I'm on to something, and I was making flannelette nightgowns, you know, from stripping to flannelette nightgowns. And it's been really interesting, especially with the internet sales. Like, I just sent one to Hong Kong. You know, I've sent nightgowns to Europe, and the Americans love me, and so that's been kind of really quite interesting, and I enjoy it. I sit back and, you know, I dabble. I'm retired now, and I love sitting and I sell at Fort Steele, and there's a shop in Vancouver that's interested. I'll be taking some down, yeah, and yeah, it's just something that I enjoy doing, and everyone needs to be warm and cozy. 2009, I think. It's been such a blur. How did it happen? when I was here, when I was in Nelson, people would say, so what was it like? They'd ask me about my life, burlesque and stripping, and or I get calls from women going, so do I wear my garter belt under my panties or over my panties? And he was like, well, honey, need to say no more. And so I thought, okay, maybe I should just do a little class on the art of striptease. I didn't know burlesque was happening. Again, I'm living in Nelson. I'm busy at the ski hill, right? And so I thought, okay. So I Googled striptease, and there wasn't much. And so I Googled burlesque, and this woman in New York, Jo Weldon, came up, and she runs the New York School of Burlesque, and she'd just written a book. So I emailed her and said, I'd really like to get one of your books, and it was on stripping, right? I'd like to, immediately she came out and she said, what's your phone number? I told her I got a phone call, and from New York, from this woman, and she goes, Judith Stein, where are you? And I went, Nelson, British Columbia, who is this? And she said, all the legends of Beehoff talk about you. And I go, what's a legend? What's Beehoff? Right? Well, Beehoff is the Burlesque Hall of Fame, right? Which is this huge festival in Las Vegas every year. A legend is a woman who at this, is worked anywhere from the 1940s to the 1990s when we were still strippers. She said, you've got to come to this. So I went to Beehoff one year and not knowing what to expect. It was like, okay, I've never been to Vegas in my life. And I walk in, and here's all these women that I had worked with going, Stein, where have you been? Where did you go? What are you doing, right? And it was like the woman that mentored me in probably one of my first shows when I first started, to people I had worked with on the road. Some of them had worked in Nelson, BC. Gus Adams used to, at the Lord Nelson used to book strippers, right? And it was just like, yahoo! So that was interesting. And then one of the legends told one of the kids from Vancouver saying, because there were no Canadian legends recorded at that point. And Fanny Annie told Burgundy Bricks out of Vancouver, Judith Stein's a legend, right? Okay. I'm still trying to figure out what a legend is. So that was cool. So I came home, and I got a phone call from the Vancouver Burlesque Festival saying, we'd really like you to be in our show. And their festival, it was a Vancouver International Burlesque Festival. Shortly right after that, a group out of Victoria, the Cheesecake Burlesque, called me and said, we're going to have a show at the Capitol, do you want to be in it? And I was like, okay. Okay. And so away we went. So my first show, after all those years, was at the Capitol, and called up a girlfriend of mine and said, I'm going back on stage, and she's a costume maker in Vegas, and she said, okay, let me make you something. It was like, okay, and it was like, and I was excited, but I was also like, oh my God, what have I done? And I'm standing backstage, and I'm going through every worst case scenario possibly, and there's, all my ski buddies, everyone who knew me from home support, and, who had heard about me, but And it was great. I had a great time. And I went to Vancouver and again had a great time, got a standing ovation. And one of the guys from New York, the New York scene was there, and he said, I got to get you into the New York Festival. We've got to get you on the Burlesque Hall of Fame stage. And it was like, okay. And I haven't looked back. And it's been quite delightful. And it's interesting for me as a woman because we as legends, back in our day, we all had perfect little bodies. You know, you had to be perfect. And so now, here we are, we're in our 60s or 70s. Tony Elling is 90, right? And the boobs fell down, yeah? The thighs are a little bit jiggly, you know, and we have wrinkles on our face, but you see that legend show, every one of them can stop on a dime. They know what it's about, they know how to entertain. And it's not necessarily about the dance, it's about the connection. It's making people feel good, yeah, and making them think, and maybe giving them a little twinge in their knickers. That's what burlesque is about, and that's what stripping is about. A lot of people say that I appear confident. Yeah, I do. That doesn't mean I'm always confident. That doesn't mean I haven't bumped my butt on the road of life, that's for sure. But I think the ability that we know that we do, we have to pay attention to our own strength and own it. Yeah, yeah, you know, there are going to be hard times, but there's going to be good times, and I think just, yeah, that's life. The road of life is full of potholes. The trick is getting yourself out of the pothole and keep going. When you're going through hell, keep going.